record. And so what I would like you to do to start with is to do a bit of an icebreaker and think about what our logos of our partner organizations represent. So this is the first logo, and I'll give you 10 seconds or so to think about what you think Getting On Board's logo represents. So 10 seconds for you to put in the chat what you think Getting On Board's logo represents. I'm not seeing anything so far. Yes, I'm loving it. More is coming through. So we've got people coming together, collaboration, teamwork, collaboration together on board. Yes, it's very much like this. So it represents people sitting around the board table, all with an equal voice. So good guesses. That is the logo for Getting On Board. Your next challenge is to guess the logo for Action for Racial Diversity. This is their logo. Again, I'm going to give you 10 seconds to think about what that represents. All in it together. Love that. I have to say, whenever I think of that, I think of High School Musical. Anyone else out there? I was definitely too old to watch that when it came out, but loved it. We've got different perspectives, building connections, people linking arms, smiling. Love that. Diverse group of people working together. Different voices on board. Inclusivity, love that. So what Malcolm said, who is the founder for Action for Racial Diversity, is this represents diversity in action, liveliness, togetherness, and a common purpose, which is really nice. And finally, here is our logo, the Young Trustees Movement logo. So again, another 10 seconds to get your creative juices flowing. What do you think that this represents? Opening doors, lots of opening doors, bridging the gap, a way in, linking up, lowering a bridge to access. Nice. Okay, so yes, you're right. This is a double meaning. So what this represents is, yes, opening the doors, but it also represents an electric circuit with the idea that we're bringing new energy and new ideas in the boardroom. So those are those logos. Thank you very much for participating in that. I very much enjoyed that. I hope you did too. One moment, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. And I hope you enjoyed that. So this is actually our second webinar around how we can build the pipeline for board talent. Our first webinar spoke about why you should do it, talking about the various benefits of succession planning, increasing the diversity pool from which people recruit, and a gentle way to support reluctant boards as to the benefits of more diverse voices. And if you are interested in that webinar, Grace has just put into the chat that previous webinar. So if you need a reason to, or a way to convince your previous board to get on board with the idea of why shadowing is such a great idea, go to that webinar. What this webinar is more focused on is, our board is on board. How do we practically make it happen? And we've got an incredible panel lineup for you who are all at different stages in their journey. And what we really want to encourage is that you can take action right now, wherever you are in your journey, however your board looks. And that is the beauty of some of this work, is it enables you to take really tangible action, regardless of the budget or the size of your organization. So we're going to jump straight in and hear from our first panelist. But before I introduce them, I just want to remind you that this webinar is aimed to ensure that you leave it with everything that you need. So please do fill in the type form that Grace has put into the chat with all the questions that you want answered from this, so that you can leave this taking practical action. So without further ado, I would love to introduce our first speaker and panelist, Pat, who is from the Citizens Advice Eastbourne on a trainee and a trainee trustee. So Pat, please introduce yourself. Why do you do this, and what does the process look like for you? Over to you, Pat.
You're on mute.
Pat, you're on mute. Sorry.
Mita, as host, I think you can request unmute.
Hello, my name's Pat Taylor. I am Vice Chair of Citizens Advice in Eastbourne. We've been around since the 1960s, and when I first joined our board 3 years ago, I was one of only 2 women on the board. I'm retired. Most of the other people on the board were also retired, and we recognised that we needed to bring some new energy into the board. So I didn't have a problem with other people, other trustees getting into that at all. But the issue for us was how to do it, because traditionally we just talked to people we knew and got them interested. So what we did was we advertised in a very particular way. We used lots of different media channels. We used LinkedIn with Malcolm John and others. And we basically said in the advert that we were looking for people who didn't necessarily think of themselves as trustees, who maybe had no previous experience, but were interested in doing something for their community. And we emphasised as well the need for us to be more diverse, to reflect our local community profiles. We had quite a lot of applications from that. And where we are now, just a year later, we have 6 women and just 2 men. We have a woman from Nigeria. She moved here 3 years ago. And we have a whole different age range from the under 30s, mid 30s, 40s, over 50s, over 60s. So it's worked really well in that way. The other thing we did was we advertised for a trainee trustee. And what we said we would do would be to offer that trainee a year's ongoing support and mentoring. In practice, what we always do is we have a whole checklist of training. We're supported by National Citizens Advice, who have various online training. So we work through that programme with everybody, and we give everyone a buddy from amongst the existing trustees. So we do a lot of training and support anyway, but we wanted to take the pressure off somebody applying as a trainee. In practice, the person we got, Doyen Sola, is incredibly clued up and very confident, and has already been playing a full role on the board. So we're very happy with how that's gone. The only issue that we've found, which I think is important learning for us, is that with so many younger people, they have a lot of other responsibilities, not least working full time. I think all of them, all of those under 50 now work full time, and one is a young mother as well. And that's left us with a bit of a problem in terms of our capacity as trustees to do other things. So I would say it's important to look at the balance. It's important to do some succession planning and think about the impact, but we're very happy with how it's gone so far.
Thanks so much, Pat. And I think that's such an excellent example of an organisation saying, okay, what is our current situation? What can we do now? And what can we build for the future? And you mentioned how you diversified your recruitment. Side note, getting on board, have a fantastic guide on how to recruit for trustees. And considering that a lot of recruitment is done by a word of mouth, you generally tend to recruit like for like. So not only did you start that recruitment and you have seen the benefits now, but you've also developed that program to develop the future pipeline for organizations. And I loved what you said there around like some people in their life stage right now, trusteeship might not be right for them, but it doesn't mean that we can't enable access for them in the future as well. Thanks so much for sharing that, Pat. Okay. Over to our next panelist, Mike Allen from Involve, who is going to talk about some of their shadow trustee role. Over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Mita. Thanks. As Mita said, I work for Involved Community Services. We're a local infrastructure organisation, a CBS, covering 2 areas in Berkshire. My role particularly is recruiting trustees for other charities across the Thames Valley, and we do trustee training and governance support and things like that. I'm also a trustee of a micro charity in Reading, and been involved in the voluntary and community sector for a long time. Let me talk about our board. Involved Community Services Board is people mostly of working age, diverse in gender and age, got people in our late 30s and 40s, mostly professional people with local connections. Half the board have been trustees for less than 3 years, and all of them for less than 6 or 7 years, I believe. And they meet quarterly and generally now online. What happened back in December of last year is the chair approached me and said they would like to recruit a shadow trustee, a younger person between 18 and 25 ideally, for a 12-month supported learning period, someone who didn't have any previous experience of being a trustee or a committee member or any leadership experience. The idea was to have someone join the board for 12 months without the legal responsibility of being a trustee, to train them and support them, respond to their local knowledge, get them to contribute to the board, and then at the end of 12 months, having completed our trustee training and a bit of support from the board, from the staff here and the rest of it, to actively help them to be recruited for another charity where they'd come with 1 year experience, already trained as a trustee, our recommendation, and so on. Our chair, I'm really pleased, our chair didn't want the young shadow trustee to speak for all younger people, but they might be better connected to communities than our trustees, our existing trustees and our staff are. Remember, we're a CVS. We support other charities and non-profit organisations in the area. So we champion local charities, represent them, etc., etc. And it was important for our board to show that we are leading good practice in the voluntary and community sector. By example, helping young people access trusteeship, demonstrating the board understands about diversity, and it needs active work from our trustees and from our staff. And that's the example, that's the basis this was set up for. It's still incredibly new. I drafted a role description based on our existing trustees one, advertised fairly widely, I thought, through youth work organisations and universities and our contacts. And we actually got 9 applicants, 3 completely out of the area, and one of whom I've actually already talked to a CVS where she lives up in Hertfordshire, and hopefully there's going to be some connections up there. We interviewed 6 people in the end, and we appointed only last week to do that. So it's very, very clear. What was interesting was that all of the applicants we spoke with were already quite confident, already working at university, those sorts of things. We didn't ask for CVs, but we still did an online process to get this, and we didn't attract young people with lived experience. Not that our charity's cause is working with people with lived experience particularly. So it's too early to say how this will work out. The young person we've recruited is very confident. She's working in a non-charity field, but she's very driven by diversity issues in her field. And it's going to be interesting to see what her experience is working with our board. Our chair has said the intention is to set up this pipeline again in 12 months' time to learn where we got it right and where we got it wrong. How we might attract people from more diverse communities, how we advertise next year. As I said, we only had 9 applicants for quite an intense campaign there as well. I think we're going to have a lot more questions as we go on. So very, very new, very exciting for us as a board.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that live process with us, because this work is ongoing and it's not always helpful to show the perfect finished final end product, and we need more people being like, this is a live project, we're innovating. And you showed so many examples of that. You demonstrated so many examples in there of where you looked at the current situation and said, here is our end goal, here are our values, how can we innovate to do better? And it's that constant flow of innovation, which I think this is what it's all about. We're never going to get it perfect, and leadership is about acknowledging our space in innovation, and always like saying that we are on a continuous learning journey. I love that. Also, just love that you mentioned there that when you have a diversity of perspectives, it doesn't mean that you represent all people from that group experience. So it's also really important when we're doing this work practically to still start with an understanding of, okay, why are we actually doing this work in the first place? And understanding that we know like what is the value of a diversity of perspectives in the room. It's not to represent all people, it's there to act as to inform how we can improve governance in the whole sense. Happy to answer more questions about that if anybody has any questions, because we often find that there are questions around that. Thank you again, Mike. Over to Naomi. Please tell us, Naomi, a little bit about yourself, the organisation and your board apprenticeship scheme.
Thanks, Mita. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
great. Yeah, so hello, I'm Naomi De Silva, Head of Business Assurance for Central YMCA. For those who don't know us, the YMCA is a federated structure, and Central YMCA is the founding YMCA, so we were founded in 1844. So we are a national charity focused on advancing the education, health and wellbeing of our communities. We provide a range of education and training opportunities nationally with sites across England. We have a training provider, an awarding organisation, and actually one of the largest gyms in central London. So in terms of my role, I've been working with charity boards for around 15 years, and at Central YMCA, I lead on the charity's corporate governance arrangements, along with our approach to risk management. So I work closely with our CEO and chair. So through my role, I'm very much involved in governance reviews and board recruitment and induction. So in terms of our trustee apprenticeship programme, this was essentially born out of an externally facilitated board and governance review that we carried out several years ago. So it was around the time of the updated charity governance code, which had a much greater focus on equality, diversity and inclusion, and some more practical steps in how you can improve the diversity of the board. And we knew that that was something that we really needed to work on. So we had a number of vacancies on our board at the time. And so we had a very successful recruitment campaign using a search agency. So we worked with Cadence Partners, who actually have a lot of experience in improving diversity on boards. And we got some amazing trustees. We have some amazing trustees and a much greater balance on the board. However, through that process, we realised that we were still not accessing some members of our communities, and the vacancies we had at the time were very specialist. We needed some professional skills that really that needed experienced trustees, and so this prevented some of those starting out in their careers, I suppose, accessing those trustee roles. Therefore, we agreed with our board to develop a trustee apprenticeship programme, whereby we'd use our experience as an apprenticeship training provider to provide a 12-month tailored programme for individuals to experience the role of a trustee without any of the legal responsibilities. So very similar to the other programmes that you've heard about. It was providing that governance experience without having the full role of a trustee. One of our key values as an organisation is equity, and we recognise that not everyone has the same opportunities in life, and therefore this programme really helps those that don't have perhaps the access to the networks or experience to take on that first trustee role. So again, we worked with Cadence Partners to access their networks to find applicants for our programme. This included individuals who'd applied for other trustee roles and been unsuccessful due to their lack of experience. Again, similar to the other programmes, part of our programme involves the apprentice trustees being buddied up with an experienced trustee who works with them closely over the 12 months of the programme to help them understand the role of a trustee and provide some practical guidance based charity charity commission guidance, things like how to review the papers. I mean, we're a particularly complicated charity with a lot of regulations. So some of the papers that would come to trustees or apprentice trustees would be really out of their normal day job, I suppose. And so it's having somebody to hold their hand through that process as they prepare for board meetings. So like all of our trustees, apprentice trustees receive a full induction. They attend all of our board meetings. They receive board packs and are communicated like any other trustee. But we also make additional training available based on the need of the individual. So it's very much a tailored program. Some will come to us with very little governance experience, not really understanding what a board would do or board does, and they might need specific training. One of our applicants or one of our participants wanted training on financial governance and the responsibilities, the financial responsibilities of trustees. At the end of our programme, we aim to support the participant to find their first trustee role. And that may either be on our board if there's a suitable vacancy, or through supporting them by signposting them to other organisations within our network. To date, we've had 2 participants on the programme with mixed results. But overall, it's been a really great experience for us. We've gained so much from the candidates, for the participants. As much as we've given to them, we've got back in return. They've brought a new perspective to discussions and their own expertise. I mean, sometimes it's just asking, they might ask the obvious question, which other trustees are scared to ask because they feel, based on their experience, they should know the answer. But actually, it's really opened up conversations at board level because of that.
Thank you.
Sorry, am I over time?
But I could listen to you speak all day, but unfortunately, yes,
yeah, that's fine. Okay.
I think that was a really beautiful space to end on, though, because just because you're new to a space doesn't mean you don't have anything to add. And like the role, as you mentioned, like this is all about innovation. So those questions open up spaces for innovation for the whole board. So it is an opportunity. So I just want to unpack and take out a couple of things that you said in there. So one of the things you mentioned was around relationship building, like and the informal things that happen on a board. There is so much that happens. Like we've all been in a room where we've been like, oh my goodness, what is happening here? Does everyone think I'm a fraud? And actually building up those relationships means that you have the time to get past some of all those things, so that if you actually arrive in a boardroom later, you've had the space to work through those things without having the additional responsibilities. And we know that people on the sharp end of exclusion often feel that more. It's interesting because in the lead up to this webinar, one of our interns was like, I love the idea of shadow placements, because if I was going to walk into a boardroom, I would have so much anxiety that it just enables me to relax that little bit more into the space before, and then have the headspace to think about it, because it's not a formal role. You spoke about skills as well, and developing the pipeline, not only within your organisation, but being generous to the rest of the sector as well. And I do think bigger organisations hold a responsibility to build the pipeline, because where do trustees learn their skills if we in the charity sector are not investing in younger people? Then they're not growing. So thank you for sharing some of those key things. There are I think there are a couple of questions but to follow up on, but we will go on to our next brilliant speaker, which I believe is Ambereen Shah, who is actually a great campaigner in this space and I also want to shout out to their incredible work in this space as well, for bringing this webinar together. Just wanted to share that, Ambereen, and over to you. Could you introduce a little bit about yourself, why you're so passionate about this work, and some of the work that you're doing?
Thanks, Mita. And you'll probably have to make me stop as well, so please feel free to when I overrun. I suspect I will. Thank you. My name's Ambereen Shah, and I am a trustee currently in 2 organisations, but relatively new to the trustee world. So Smallwood Trust, which is a foundation supporting financial resilience of women. I've been a trustee there for about 12 months now, just over a year. And when I first joined that board, I guess I was in a bit of a headspace that thought about, I was always thinking about how you can support people with lived experience, those who are that much closer to the issues that you're seeking to address, how can they have how can you shift power to people like that, who can bring that experience and expertise to bear, and also stuff around participatory grant making. I'm a grant maker by background. I worked at the National Lottery Community Fund for 12 years, and I guess I feel like as a grant maker and a social researcher, it's sort of in my blood to go, well, how can we do this better? And I guess those were the conditions that created the idea of having a shadowy at Smallwood Trust, and what we created was what we eventually advertised with the support of the CEO, who's been brilliant in this. And I think that sort of leadership from within the organisation is really important in making this happen. And with him being on board, it happened quite quickly. So it wasn't an overly thought out programme, I have to admit. The idea was born. We advertised for shadowies to shadow the board, so support women with lived experience of poverty. That's how we framed it. And what it was about was just understanding what the board is and does, recognising that for many people, it's a bit of a mystery that there is this governance structure, and also a very intimidating, rarefied, perhaps, idea of what the types of people that sit on this board. And for me, there was this thing that you could train to be a board member, and then you could apply and be on a board member. But there seemed to be a gap of actually where could you actually just go and take it in, just because seeing is believing, and recognizing that the people who sit around the board are just people and haven't got some extra special powers. So it was that sort of trying to create that sort of space. I was also conscious of the fact that I'm a working mum, and I know how busy life can be on the everyday. So I wanted to create an opportunity that was not burdensome. So it was something that could be as light touch as the person needed it to be. So turn up to meetings, observe the meetings, read the papers, as many as you time allows, but that you didn't have to go give too much of yourself. So you had that exposure without having to give too much at this stage. We had quite a light touch application process where we advertised the role through social media, but also through the grant holders that Smallwood funds. And we got about 17 applications. And really, it was myself and the CEO who sifted through it. And I guess one of the key learnings of all of this has been that I think if in this circumstance, it wasn't me fronting up, so whoever your board member is, that is the one that's rather than advertise the position, I felt the learning was advertise a relationship that you can build with someone. And in some ways, if it wasn't me fronting it up, I think we might have got different kinds of applications. If it was somebody else fronting up, you might have attracted different kinds of people. So I think that it's that relationship that I hope that we built. And the interview was literally, we shortlisted, and then we had a bit of a chemistry chat, if you want to put it that way. It wasn't an interview. For me, it was more of a conversation, and it'll be interesting to see what Shana says, but for me it was a bit more of a conversation to see whether there was a fit from both sides, whether the person who was interested in being a shadowy was still interested in the opportunity once they heard more about it, and whether we as two individuals felt that we could work together as well. Luckily to say that everyone who showed an interest and that was shortlisted was on board. And again, originally we decided to take one person on board, but then on reflection, we had some really good candidates. The reality was it was all online. So what difference does it make if one person is shadowing you or three people? There's just 3 screens that are open on one meeting. So it didn't feel extra burdensome to take on a cohort. And actually for me, a key learning is the cohort model works really well, because actually the support that the women were able to give each other is different to the types of support that they were able to get through me. And again, Shana, who is one of our shadowies, who I will give the last word to, can maybe reflect on how that worked for her. Another key learning, I guess, was there was an opportunity we put in some budget, a training budget attached to each person. Now, it wasn't used by 2 of them at all, but I guess there was an opportunity of up to £500 is what the CEO put towards this, and credit to him, for a training budget for anything that they felt they needed to do that would support them in thinking about their role. And it was, again, just a conversation between me and the shadowy to see whether that money could be spent in whatever way they felt would be helpful to them. given limited time, I'm just going to say one of the key benefits, I think, for the organisation has been, I think this opportunity really did fit with the mission of Smallwood Trust, which is about empowering women with lived experience and shifting power to them. And I hope it's been a small step in shifting, another step in shifting in that direction as a foundation, which is a journey. It doesn't happen overnight. And with the women, I hope that between, well, all of us actually, as the trustee and those who shadowed me, I hope that what we've been able to do is give them confidence to step into those roles and just see that actually these are normal people who sit around and their key role is to ask incisive questions, but actually you can have with pre-meetings and debriefings, you can have the opportunity to just get your head into a space of what those papers really mean, and make some sense of them rather than it's all about at the meeting and being seen to be intelligent at the meeting, which many of us rarely are, to be honest. But I will stop there and pass on to Shana, if that's okay, who is one of the trustees who's just spent 12 months on the shadowing programme, and we are now, just to say, we're going to recruit another cohort in September, but Shana's come to the end of her first that term. But over to you, Shana.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. So yeah, so I've shadowed Anne-Marie for roughly a year now, and even when the opportunity came up, it was an email. I wasn't 100% sure because I've had lived experience of domestic abuse 25 years, and my life at that time was all over the place, so I didn't fully understand what's the role of a trustee. I'm neurodiverse as well, so my understanding of the board is lots of paperwork, and when do you make time for that paperwork? I was really curious about Smallwood Trust anyway, so I thought, what happens on a board decision making level? What actually happens on that level? So I thought I'd email back, put in my interest, and explain that obviously I'm neurodiverse, and they've been absolutely great, and Breen especially, because the initial interview was through Zoom, so it was a conversation. It wasn't a lengthy application where I had to fill in lots of paperwork. I just had a hunger to learn what happens and also build my networks as well, and fully understand what happens behind closed doors. And since then, the experience has been, it's been amazing, because I am a trustee now for a national charity, Save Lives, who are a domestic abuse charity. So I'm a fully lived experience trustee for them. And I think that important about nurturing is just recognizing that we're all at different stages. And I think with Umbreen, she recognized that there were 3 of us and we were all at different stages. And I think the pre-briefs and the debriefs were great. And just meeting us where we were, because I at the time I had young children as well, so thinking about the time commitment, and also, do I have anything of value to bring to the table? And I think understanding how the board operated and giving back as well, I felt it was very, very rich for me anyway. And those questions that I think Naomi did mention on, those questions that you think, is this a stupid question to ask? But Umbreen was great, because Umbreen already knew some of the paperwork that this might be too much for us to understand. So she used to go through it with us. You know, is there anything else you need? And I think that really, really helped us, knowing that we were 3 women from 3 different stages, and having that support from the women as well, my other colleagues who were on the shadowy program, because we were all at different stages. I was a survivor of domestic abuse. There was somebody else who was going through the first stages of going through that as well. So it's building relationships. So it wasn't just being a shadowy for Smallwood Trust. We actually built a relationship outside of Smallwood Trust as well, supporting each other. And yeah, my argument for any board would be, if you are out there, if your mission statement is to support disadvantaged women, women who are experiencing poverty, then instead of you know, and sharing that power, then there should be a voice on that board just to triangulate are we doing what we're doing? Is it correct? And as Mita mentioned as well, innovation, because how I see as a recipient, as somebody who's supposed to benefit from the charity, as a disadvantaged woman, you have a different insight of where are the hurdles, and you might bring something to the table that's totally different from your traditional board members. So I felt as though I think I probably should ask that question to Ambreen, that I did ask questions that maybe nobody else would have thought about. And now with my national role, sitting on a trustee, using my lived experience, it's really it's benefited the charity, and for me, it's using my past experience, which has been adversity, and bringing it to a board that we're using it to innovate, which has been a great opportunity for myself as well. I had no thoughts about being a trustee for a national charity. However, because I was a shadowee for Smallwood Trust, I thought, I understand this is familiar to me now. So it just gives you that extra bit of confidence to be a trustee for a national organization. I'll leave it there. I think I've got a bit of talking to do later on as well, so I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. And we've had some great comments in the chat there of sharing how powerful those reflections are. I think what really came through there as well is when you joined the board, you already had the most important skills to be a board member, which was a curiosity and a passion and a care. And those are the most important skills. And what it seems like the program did was nurture your skills and unlock your talent. And so many times we see brilliant talent and much needed perspectives leave the boardroom because that nurturing isn't done. So I thought that was an interesting reflection of how powerful insights are sometimes lost, and what happens if you're not having those things in place. And exciting to hear that you have another board role, Shauna. So now we're going to go deep dive into the questions. Please do ensure that you submit your questions. You can do that anonymously or on the chat. I'm going to kick off with some of the questions that we've seen here, which is, do you have a specific clause constitutionally to allow for a shadow trustee? Does anybody want to elaborate on that?
I mean, I can do. I'm not talking from any particular major insight, but I mean, in terms of, I've implemented it now in 2 organisations, so Charity Bank and Smallwood Trust, and no one's gone, oh, I've got to go back to my constitution to be able to do this. So I'm pretty certain that you don't have to. It'd be interesting to see if others agree, but I don't, it's because they don't have any legal responsibilities. I think you can just do it.
The same for us, yeah.
Sorry, just to follow on from that question. So do your shadow trustees have voting rights or anything like that then?
Ours don't.
I didn't catch the question. What rates?
Voting rights.
Oh, voting rights. No. It was an observer for us. It was an observer only status. And one of the bits of learning is where do you provide space for that individual to be able to say what they think when they feel they have the confidence to say when they want to say that. And my experience has been, perhaps in the early meetings, it's actually quite a nice thing to be just an observer and just to absorb and take it in and not have the pressure. But there was some learning from the evaluation that we did of this program, that by the end people were like, actually, I'd like to have my voice heard. So we're going to try to build that in a bit more, but no voting rights.
We're very clear, because it's a shadow role, that there aren't voting rights. But the last time I remember a vote on any trustee board has to be more years ago than I can think about. Mostly it's just discussion. And in setting up our role, we wanted full contribution from the shadow person. Part of the thing that I've shared with you in the chat actually talks about, yes, we need someone to engage in the debate to understand those things as well.
Thank you. And I think that question also brings up an interesting question of, like, sometimes you might be juggling multiple questions, like what does it say about power if you don't have voting rights versus like things that you just need to make things happen now. And I think as long as you're innovating and asking yourselves those questions, it's an important thing. You don't have to have everything worked out immediately. Another question, practical question, what about confidentiality in the boardroom, especially during things like finances?
Do you want me to start on that? We ask everyone, we always invite people who've applied to be trustees to up to 2 meetings as observers. And so we always have to deal with that question where we ask them to sign a confidentiality agreement. And it's basically on that understanding that they're invited to the meeting. There's nothing you can do generally if someone chooses to break confidentiality, but we treat them the same way as trustees. All trustees have to sign that agreement. So.
Thank you. Mike, did you want to add?
Our chair has written to the shadow trustee, the person we have just appointed, really stating the case for confidentiality, making sure that they understand their responsibilities there and what is confidential in terms of the papers they get. But we haven't issued a confidentiality agreement or anything else like that, and we don't with other trustees as well. We expect full trustees to understand their responsibilities to the board, and I think this shadow will be smart enough, clever enough, well-informed enough, supportive enough. I don't really know what the right word is there, but I think, you know, in terms of the chair saying to that person, these things are confidential, I think that will work.
Thank you for sharing that, Mike. And have any of you found it necessary to change your board culture to accommodate more diverse trustees and perspectives?
I think from our perspective, we have, in theory, a board that is very supportive of increasing diversity on the board, and therefore would like to think that their culture would accommodate that. But I think practically it can be quite difficult in terms of if somebody's joining a board meeting, and a lot of our board are professionals, and so they will go straight into the very, very technical financial reviews and things that would probably be quite inaccessible for somebody who is new to a trustee role. And that's why I think for us it's the outside of the board meeting aspect of the role that's so important, because I think it would be quite challenging for somebody who was joining if they didn't have that support outside of board meetings, because for that reason. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that, Naomi. And we've definitely found that with like if you're not changing your board culture and innovating, then you're not making the most of it. And again, like you should always be changing your culture to work more inclusively. And it's really important to ask yourself the question, so you're not losing talent, because we do see people leave when the board culture isn't right. Another question, and did the younger applicants provide any useful feedback on how they found the application process? It'd be really helpful to hear about your experiences.
I mean, we had a range of applicants. It wasn't specifically aimed at young people, although the charity bank one has been. That's been more about young people from diverse backgrounds, recognizing that there is a lack of diversity in the financial sector. But I think that sort of paperwork light, conversation heavy approach has meant that it felt more accessible. I mean, I think the key learning for me, especially around the Smallwood one about doing it again, would be in the first one we asked for lived experience of poverty, and although it was just send us an email, tell us why you might be interested, people told us of their lived experience of poverty, which felt really odd reading it, because when I fill out an application, I don't feel compelled to tell people about my personal life and adversity that I might have experienced in that way. And it felt odd to get people, and being trauma informed and just reflecting on that. So next time round, I think we will literally, if it continues to be lived experience of poverty, then it's literally, have you tick this box, and that's it. It's a trust-based approach. So for me, just making the application process as relational as possible, given this isn't a job that people are applying for and it's about accessibility, is an important part of it.
Thank you. And I think what really has come through in this webinar so far is so much about this program. These programs are about the relationships. And we definitely hear that all the time around, the reason why I applied is because someone sat there and said, I believe in you to apply. And that's the biggest reason why someone is more likely to apply. On the theme, someone's just submitted a question. Could you share more on the themes of, if you were to do your program again, what would you have done differently, and what are your top tips?
I'm happy to start because I didn't actually get to that in my presentation, but I think for us, in terms of what went well and what didn't go so well, I think it's being really clear from the onset of how much time is required by the role, because I think the success of the role depends on how much that the participant can meet with their buddy outside of the board meetings. Because if they only have availability to attend board meetings, which for us are quarterly, I don't think, because of the complexity of the discussion, I don't think they will get have got as much out of the programme. And it's, as you've referred to previously, it's so much about the relationships that they build. And also another challenge for us, because we launched the programme during COVID, when everything's online, you don't get that informal discussion outside of board meetings. They tend to be a bit more transactional, so there's no discussion with other trustees before and after for the applicant to be able to learn about the other trustees' experience and ask those more informal questions. So I think those are the kind of two areas. Be really clear from the start how much time they have, and also find ways for the applicant or for the participant to have some of those more informal conversations with other trustees.
Thank you, Naomi. Did anyone want to build on that?
I'm quite interested in the process for recruiting people as well, because one of the things that I just did naturally without thinking about it was we get people who will email us and say we're interested in being a trustee, because it's always up there as an advert on our website. And what I always do is pick up the phone and talk to them, and just have that initial chat and say, oh, who are you? Really interested to speak to you. What's your background? What's made you interested in this? And then by the end of and tell them a bit about the role. By the end of the conversation, they've given me their application in effect. So when I say, could you just send me a couple of paragraphs telling me why you'd like to be in this role, just what you've just told me now, it's actually quite straightforward for them to do that. We then invite them to meetings, and we then invite them for an interview. But the interview itself is like a conversation, much more than a job interview. So I think that informal approach is really important.
And I was just going to add that, and picking up on what Mike said earlier about and the confidentiality point. So we have a document that sets out the roles and responsibilities for both parties, for the shadowee and what responsibility and role the funder in this case is going to have to them. And one of the key learnings I think has been that it is time dependent, and the three women that shadowed me had different stuff going on in their life, so therefore different time to give to it. But it's not just about the board meetings. I guess there are subcommittees. Should they want to be part of those conversations, they can observe them. You provide the opportunity, and if it piques an interest, somebody can go, I'd really love to do that. Shana also, for instance, she then attended a decision-making panel as a full member, so not just as an observer. Shana also chaired another webinar for us. I think the link has been posted on the website for that one. So there were other opportunities that came up, and one of the things that didn't quite happen, but I think the idea is good, that we also said that the shadowies could represent the organisation at some meetings. So often charities are invited to lots of launch events where there's a report or a thing that's happening, a strategy that's being launched, and actually where Smallwood is a very small staff team and quite stretched. So again, providing that opportunity to go to those events and represent the organisation, because you're there to listen and then feedback. As I said, it didn't happen that much in this case, but I think it's something again that you can build in. And so it is the board, attending board meetings is the pillar stone, but around that there are lots of other things that you can provide the opportunity to, and people can take up if they have time and interest.
Thank you. Sorry, go on, Mike.
I think there's also something about the initial part of the process. As I said, as I was introducing what we did, we didn't get enough applicants. We had a lot of people rushed in. We set a closing date, and most of the applicants came in on or even beyond, one day beyond the closing date. And I think when we do it again, we're going to look at where we advertise, where we promote this. Yes, it was on our website. Yes, it was on volunteering forums. There were a number of organisations represented even here in this webinar who helped promote it as well. But we've still only got 9 people, 3 of whom were nowhere near geographically at all. So we're looking at how we're going to do it. We may even start earlier in the year and say, in 6 months' time, we're going to be recruiting. Talk to us informally now. Talk to youth workers, talk to people at university, talk to people at college, in order to get sufficient people who are interested. And then it is very informal once we've got the names. But not getting enough people was almost the bane of what we were doing. And it has worked, but I would have liked to have interviewed and seen a lot more people.
Thanks so much, Mike. And I think that really nicely sums up the theme of this webinar, which is about being creative and finding solutions to problems and just starting now and not waiting to be perfect, which I think is a really exciting space to live in and learning from each other. There was a question in here which says, any practical tips for what changing board culture looks like in real life? We don't have time to answer that question, but what I would say is we have 38 amazing people in this webinar, so please do put in your practical tips in the chat. And we'll conclude, because I respect your lunchtime too much to run over, with each panelist sharing one short sentence on what you hope people would take away from this webinar. Panelists, please do nominate the next person to go next so that it can run smoothly. And I'm going to go and start with Anne-Marie.
Mute myself. So the one thing that what I hope you get out of it is that if you get senior buy-in and just go for it. Because I think, as Amita's already said, this doesn't have to be perfect. Do it thoughtfully and with respect, but don't over-process it. And remember, it is about the relationship.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Who do you nominate to go next of the panelists?
Pat.
I'm afraid you took the words out of my mouth, Anne-Marie. I was basically just going to say, don't overcomplicate this. The important thing is that you want to do it. And if you want to do it, you learn as you go and make mistakes along the way, but try not to, obviously, learn from what we've done. But just keep it simple and stick within what resources you've got as well.
Thank you, Pat. Who do you nominate to go next?
Sorry, Mike.
Easy said. Thank you. I mean, I'm going to reiterate some of the same things, but if you remember, what I said was the chair of our board approached me. Now, I'm a trustee recruiter, so I'm used to that side of it, but having it driven by the board was so important. It meant that me and our chief exec didn't have to convince the board that it was a good idea. It was being driven by trustees. And therefore, that's the most important thing. If we're talking about culture of boards and diversity on boards, it's got to come from the board itself.
Thank you, Mike. Over to you, Naomi.
Thanks. I think very similar themes to previous, but I think it's, start somewhere, but really I would recommend you get your participants to help you build that program. So it's a very much, for us, a two-way process. So if something's not working, get them to tell you, ask for feedback throughout the program. And if there's something you can do differently, don't wait till the end, find out throughout the process.
Beautifully said. Can I just add something really short in there as a snippet? Sometimes people are like, we will pay you so much money to design our process. And we say, aren't your service users? Don't you work really closely with them? Don't you have those good relationships? Yes, okay, speak to them first, because you have the resources to design this way better than we can. Such a beautiful practical tip there. And then Shauna, I'd love to hear your.
Yeah. So for organizations, I think a huge part of innovation is to look at your culture. And the great thing about diversity on your board is you'll have people who see things differently from a different perspective that you might not even have thought of. So don't be scared, just go for it and learn as you go. But courage is very, very much needed. And yeah, if you want to be an innovative board, if you want to grow, times are changing, so it's really, really important that we think ahead and listen to the voices of people who traditionally might not go on boards. So thank you.
Thank you. That was so beautifully said. And we hope people are inspired to take action. Take action was a great theme of this webinar. So I'd love for you all, everyone on here, to leave one action that they're going to go and do next. It might be, I need to go and research something. I would love to speak to somebody about how they did this in more detail. So please, before you leave, put in the chat the next practical action that you are going to take, because that is what this is about. Thank you. I want to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists for coming, leading this innovation and sharing so genuinely, authentically, so that we can create change in the sector. What is normal is not okay, but what I want to do is thank you on behalf of all of our partner organizations getting on board, Trustee for Action for Trustee Racial Diversity, and the Young Trustees movement, for showing up today and doing the work. And then again, a huge thank you to our panelists. Please do ensure that you take action after this webinar. We are here to support you do it. And thank you again for taking this time to take action. Thanks so much, everyone, and have a great lunchtime.